Hi, I'm Ashley Gordon,
And I'm Kirk Kernut.
and this is the return of Reading for the Rest of Us.
We have been gone a while.
We have.
Took a little break.
We didn't realize quite how long.
Yeah, time really slips away on you, but
When you get older,
we
which
have.
Kirk said I'm not supposed to talk about today.
That's right. Please don't. But we've had a lot of good feedback from the public about this show, and so we thought we wanted to bring it back. As always, one of the reasons we're doing this show is to promote the Alabama Book Festival, and we want to remind people that the 2015 version of that will be April 11th, and over the course of the season, we're going to have some of the authors that are going to appear at the festival beaming in through the magic of television to have a conversation.
Yep, that'll be exciting. We'll expand beyond just the two of us, although I'm sure you're really been dying to know what we're reading. We're going to expand a little bit more and have some other thoughts and opinions as well.
Well, odd that you bring that up because you came up with a great suggestion for a show based on something that's been going around social media. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, to get back into this, since we were a little bit out of practice, I thought the easiest thing would be to pick up on what's been happening on Facebook lately. A meme, which is 10 books that have affected your life. So we thought we would start with answering that question and some other people's answers.
Now, how many times were you tagged by somebody asking you for this?
Honestly, just once.
Really?
I talk about books all the time, so I didn't need the invitation.
So people probably assumed they were going to hear it anyway.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. But you did this, right?
I did.
You were telling me that you did this. I did not do it.
Did you get tagged?
A couple times. I was probably too busy uploading pictures of cats and things, but...
Bad 70s music is more likely what you were uploading.
That could be very true.
Or 80s music.
That could be true. You know, it's interesting because I have been fascinated to sort of follow what books are coming through here. Tell me, when you sat down to do it, did you just go on pure instinct, or did you, my vision, and this is probably why I didn't do it, was I would sit there and go, oh, I don't want to tell anybody I was really affected that much by that book. It'd be much more important to make it sound like this book was one of my 10 most affecting books.
Well, it's funny that you say that because it definitely did come up in the commentary around the meme. There were articles about it. It made it in the Huffington Post and tons of stuff on BuzzFeed. And some of the conjecture was, yeah, whatever, those are your 10 books.
Right.
That people were creating these lists to create an impression as opposed to books that they'd actually read. But I would argue that if the book, like, do you have to read it for it to have affected your life? And if it caused you to lie or maybe fudge a little bit on what you have read or what has made an impact on you, it made an impact even if you didn't read it. If you're lying about it, well, then clearly you're trying to create an impression. So books then are part of our cultural psyche and help define us. So they have an impact on us whether we read them or not.
That's fascinating because you're just basically saying you don't actually have to have read the book for it to have
I
affected
don't
your
think
life.
you do. No, on the 10 that I wrote, they're books that I think that it actually, some versions of it said books that you've carried with you, the ones that have stayed with you. And the friend of mine that tagged me on it, her list was heavily weighted toward books that she read in childhood or that had been read to her. And the ones that she did carry around with her emotionally, psychologically. So that's one way of looking at it.
I think that's what's interesting about it, and part of why I had a hard time doing it to the point where I didn't do it was figuring out what it means to be affected by a book, first off. You and I were talking about this beforehand, and I think part of my issue is when you teach, you read books very differently than when you read for pleasure, and yet at the same time, I find it's hard for me to read differently than the way that I read in order to get ready for a class or something like that. And so I'm thinking, okay, I was having a hard time coming up with, I could name a zillion books that I like and admire, but ones that affect me personally, I'm not sure what that means because my whole training has been to move away from that sort of purely emotional, personal investment in a book in order to try and see it more professionally, I guess. So tell me, when you're making your list, what does that mean to be affected by a book?
Well, the list itself, I did the books that have stayed with you, that taught you something, and I had that same thought process, because I do tend to read emotionally. And well, what does that mean? And is it characters that you identify with, or people that you maybe not identify with, but that you like? Somebody that you'd enjoy getting to know and having as a friend. It's the Harry Potter books made the top 100, the top 10,
Right.
really. Facebook counted what we all said. Yeah, Big Brother, they are watching. And the Harry Potter books showed up on probably more lists than anything else, sort of collectively. And did we just come to love those characters and want them to be as real
Right.
people? Is it a story that you identify with and can see yourself in? Is it a lesson that you learned? Is it something you read at a point in life and it takes you back to that point, maybe? Or a book that you shared with someone you love? Several people included books that they had read to their children. So it was a shared moment.
Yeah.
Even though I have taught, I don't think I do anything that isn't emotional. My employers would probably agree. And so I don't know how to read unemotionally.
Okay.
So all of my books were things that got in my head and then I couldn't get back out.
Well, give us an example of one that's on your list, and let's talk about why it's there.
So I think the very first one I put was Diary of Anne Frank.
Okay.
And I remember reading that. I've written about this before. It was an assigned reading in 7th grade, and it was the first time that a book had transported me in a way to a real life event that I just couldn't accept.
Yeah.
When something's imaginary, you can keep your distance from it. But this was a book where there weren't any barriers.
Okay.
You were so brought into her life, and then to begin to read around the book and the things that happened. It's not necessarily a book I loved, so they weren't all books I liked.
Okay.
How could you love it? I mean,
Yeah.
You love her voice and you love her, but you cannot separate the book from what happened to her.
Right.
and millions of others. And so I think that book has had more of an impact than any other book.
Okay. Well, by the opposite token, let's have you give us one that that you did love and you put on there strictly for maybe sentimental reasons.
The Little Prince.
Okay.
Just a beautiful story, and one of those that this was one of the other things that I thought about when you're trying to categorize. Sometimes the book itself is important, but it's because it introduces you to a voice and a way of expressing something that you didn't know was available to you.
Right.
And that book, and it's the way of looking at both a real world and an imaginary world simultaneously, and how you can take that kind of expression into your own life, and introducing you to the idea that maybe things aren't what they seem.
Okay.
And that you have some impact on what they are simply by the way you interpret them.
Were there any books on your list that were on there less because of the content or your experience with the content, but that you remembered more the experience of reading them at a certain point in your life?
Wuthering Heights.
Okay. Explain that one.
Yeah. This is kind of a sad story.
Oh, that's all right.
I read it in 4th grade.
Okay.
And it was a time when someone I loved very much, an aunt, died.
Okay.
In really unhappy circumstances. And the corollaries between those things have never been separated. So again, it wasn't necessarily something that it just was joyful, but I can't separate those two things.
Right. That's what I was asking.
And the ghost and the
Yeah.
idea of loss, and there in the story that your connection to a person can continue even after they're gone.
Okay, great. Let's run over a couple others that were on your list, and then we'll talk about some of the ones that were on here. I noticed you had one I was almost sort of surprised it's on your list, and I'm curious about it. You have the whole J.D. Salinger
The Glass Family.
Chronicles.
Yes. Yes.
You
Here,
know,
here we go. Have it.
okay.
Franny and Zoe, and then Raise High, the Roof Beam Carpenters, and all of the short stories and novellas of the Glass family.
Okay. What about those fascinates you? What's affecting you about those?
Again, I think it has a lot to do with recognizing there are things in the world beyond what you knew, or even better, with this one, you find out you're not the only one.
Yeah.
Like you think you're crazy, and then you find yourself or your family or your circumstances or your experiences in a book, and you think, oh, well, I can't be the only person. Sort of like when you go get a greeting card, and it expresses something that you thought you were all alone in thinking, and you realize, well, I can't be all alone if there's a greeting card and there are 100,000 copies of this out in the country, and you
Right.
sort of, you find your people.
Yeah.
I found my people
Okay.
in Franny and Zoe, and their angst and their sort of hyper-literate, articulate to the point of not making sense sometimes.
Well, it's interesting to me that you put them all together because, you know, just in terms of people's general tastes, I think everybody enjoys the one that you just showed us, the Franny.
Franny and Zoe.
Yeah. But then as you kind of go on in those years, they get a little more abstract, a little more, you know, with the philosophy. And
They're dense.
yeah, I think that's
They have dark
that's
moments.
the
But there's humor in the dark moments. And
Okay.
I think that part, recognizing that you have to laugh even in the darkest moments,
right.
I think comes through in a lot of Salinger's writing. Some of
Okay.
it's just frankly dark.
Yeah.
But there are moments that are just really laugh out loud funny. And then I have another list that has a lot more happy things
All right.
in it.
Well, give us one of the happy things.
Well, so a different way of thinking about this, instead of what have I been carrying with me my entire life? How did it affect your life? So, for example, just 2 nights ago, I was reading this book. It's a new one out recently by
Brand new,
Tana
right?
French. Brand new.
Yep.
It's one of those where we've been waiting for it to come out and you covet it the moment it arrives. So I had gotten about halfway through, and it's a Dublin murder mystery. And or the Dublin Squad is the group that does the investigating. And I got halfway through, and it was pushing 11, and I was super tired, and I had an early morning, and I turned out the light, and I lay there for a few minutes and thought, I can't stop. I did that 3 times.
Yeah.
And I finally just gave up and finished the book at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, and I was in Page and Palette yesterday picking up some books, and one of the booksellers there said, well, did you love it? I said, no, I didn't love it. I liked it. She said, well, why did you stay up all night reading something you didn't love? I said, well, I don't expect to love it. It's challenging, it's fascinating, it's compelling, but that's not the same as loving it.
Right.
So it affects your life in that it takes over your life, and maybe a movie does that, or a book can do that, or anything that engages your imagination. It affects your life because it brings the rest of your life to a complete screeching halt.
Yeah. I will tell you, there is one book that I read recently, not too long ago, that I had that same sort of excitement about, shall we say, where you start it and you admire everything about it and you don't want it to end, even as you're sort of frustrated with some of the choices that it might make. And that is Rachel Kushner's The Flamethrowers, which came out, I think, 2013, and it was fairly critical controversies about it, kind of polarized people. But as you know, I'm very much a 1970s guy and love the 70s, and I'm sort of a historian of the 70s in some ways. So it won't surprise you that the book is set in the 1970s. But it's also, I think, one of the things that affects me as I try to think of these qualities is I love epic books. I love a book that tries to be a big book or has some sort of over-vaunting ambition. And usually those books fail because there's just no way to realize that sort of huge
What's an example of that
aspiring.
most of us would have read?
Well, Moby Dick's probably the classic example
understand.
of somebody, burning their
Admit it.
brains out trying to do a big book.
Okay, like the great American novel,
Well,
or the...
yeah, but I think that category, I don't like using that term anymore because it
Okay.
comes with such baggage that, you know, people automatically kind of put defenses up.
Okay,
when
well,
you
give me
say it.
another one besides Moby Dick. I hadn't read that.
Well, you have Middlemarch here, and that's an example you brought of a book that was supposed to affect you but didn't
And it
affect
didn't.
you.
I couldn't
Which is
finish
interesting
it.
to me because, you know, in this past year there's been a book out by New Yorker contributor Rachel Mead that's basically my life in Middlemarch and about how, you know, her sort of whole existence as a reader revolves around George Eliot. And so I think it's fascinating that we disagree on books or we can't find our way within them. A couple years ago when the Great Gatsby movie came out, there was a very famous article by a woman, I think her name was Christina Schultz. The headline of it was "Why I Despise the Great Gatsby." And, you know, her whole argument was we should really be talking about Middlemarch instead of the Great Gatsby. So I was sort of fascinated when you brought that book and said that this is my example of one that just didn't do it for me.
Oh, okay, I have something to say about that. But
Okay.
okay, so what was the one
Well,
that you?
just bringing it back, the flamethrower,
Yeah.
flamethrowers, excuse me. But I think part of, I mean, it's a book that has a lot of different elements to it. It's about the speed of culture. The main character is a woman who is a racer, holds the land speed record for a while out in the desert. But she's also an artist, so it's a lot about art. It's
So it has a larger cultural objective in addition to just
it's
telling a
huge.
good
There's
story.
a whole section of it that
Okay.
goes into Italy and talks about the politics of Italy. And one of the people that she runs around with, his family is family has the monopoly on making tires. So, you know, you have all these disparate little bits and pieces and you're trying to pull them together. And I think it's just sort of that ambition of trying to make a big book that fascinates me. I think partly what excites me or what affects me about those types of books is to see somebody really making that, having that ambition to try to still do it in a genre that, let's face it, is really at this stage past its cultural prime. I mean, the novel, as much as we love it, is not going to be. It's not going to have the same effect on us that TV is having.
It's
or
not
that
making
other-
social commentary that then sort of guides the larger
Right.
conversation.
Exactly.
We don't,
So-
as you just pointed out, we don't all read the same books anymore.
Right. So I think those big, sort of ambitious type books, that would be the first quality that I think would affect me. Although I'll be perfectly honest, there are big books that, you know, sort of get announced at big books, and then you pick them up and you kind of open them up, and you're kind of like, yeah, exactly. So, give me another example of a book that you felt like you should have been on your list, but then, you know, when you read it, it doesn't
Well, that's
do
what
it
I was
for
going to
you?
say about Middlemarch. I actually picked it up because I think I read a quote that I think was from Virginia Woolf that Middlemarch was Jane Austen for smart people.
Okay.
And then I read it and thought, I am bored out of my mind. And then one of the things that I think makes Jane Austen so successful 200 plus years on is that 200-ish, that the story is still really good.
Right.
That yes, there's some social commentary in there, but this felt like 600 pages of social commentary and not a lot of stories. I was bored to death.
Well, I think sometimes we get into these issues of when it's supposed to be more intellectual, if it's going to be literature, and maybe that's part of what's going on with some of that anti-Jane Austen feeling. Spelled Austin, by the way, right?
No, more Facebook posts.
People may have watched the Miss America pageant the other night, and one of the bubbles that went up on the screen for one of the competitors said she loved Jane Austen and misspelled Jane Austen. So that's why we proofread in life, right?
Yeah. But then, so there are still different ways to be affected, right?
Right.
I grabbed a couple of books when I was pulling these together. This one really should go on the list, the Milagro Beanfield War. Honestly, I can't remember the first thing about the story, but this is how I ended up married to the person I'm married to.
Okay.
Because we had this very interesting and drawn-out conversation about this book, which had me convinced he was a reader, which he turned out not to be. So I probably wouldn't have married him if he hadn't read this book. So this very definitely affected my life. And then this one, Run with the Horseman, I do love. And I think a lot of people, particularly in
Right.
the South,
Yeah.
love Pharoah Sams
It's
and
a
love this
huge
book.
cult book in the
Yes,
South.
very
Yeah.
much so. But this one also affected Jake, and it's where we got the name of our second kid. So Porter Osborne Jr., the character in this novel, was someone that he so identified with. So, okay, the man's read 2 books. That he then put forth that as his suggested name for our kids. So I think
Okay.
there are, again, lots of different ways that you
Right.
can be affected by a book, or your life can have been impacted
Okay.
by it.
Tell me one that you saw going around on these lists that you were kind of shocked that people were citing a lot.
That's a good question. I think some James Joyce books
Okay.
showed up, and I was surprised only because they're so difficult. Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, and
Yeah.
I saw another article talking about this, and has anybody really finished Finnegan's Wake ever? But I don't know. I don't know. None of them really shocked me because
Okay.
we all have our own tastes, and we bring so much to our choices. I don't know. What shocked you?
Well, I'll tell you one that was on your list that sort of shocked me was the girl in the with the dragon tattoo books.
Oh, yeah.
That sort of blows me away that you were into those, or that
I
they
loved
affected
them.
you. Okay.
And see, that's another one of those where they take over your life. Read the first one, then I had to completely devour the second and third one, and it was over a summer, over about 3 or 4 days, and I don't know what my children ate, and I didn't really care
Yeah.
because I just so desperately needed to finish those books. I think, again, it's when something takes hold of you,
Right.
your imagination. So we've got another, you asked me about this. We had talked about this earlier. My
Okay.
new love.
All
So
right.
this is my new favorite author.
Okay.
I'm now like plowing through everything that she's written. Jane Gardam, British female, probably 70s or 80s at this point, Booker List kind of winner. But this series, Old Filth, which the F, it's an acronym, failed in London, try Hong Kong. And it's about a London barrister who goes to Hong Kong and his wife and their 50-year union. And the first book is from his perspective, and then the second book is from her perspective.
Oh, okay.
So some of the very same incidences, but from a different perspective or revealing a slightly different piece of it that you didn't know. And I've been listening to the second one. I was running, and I got toward the end of it, and we were going through a scene that we'd already lived through in the first book, and a new development was revealed that made me really mad on her behalf. And I had to stop running and just process it because I was so stunned and I was so angry and I wanted so badly to punch him. And of course he doesn't exist, and neither does she. But it was just another one of those moments where it affects your life because it sort of gets in you.
Okay.
You know, as an English teacher, to try to bring this around to a more universal point, obviously this happens to those of us who love to read often.
Sure.
It is not uncommon to have these kinds of investments.
Mm-hmm.
But what you want to do as a teacher or as someone who works with books or with readers, you hope that everybody has at least one.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to feel this way about all books or even about reading, but that you want every single person to have at least one book that gets inside them and
Right.
touches them and they cherish.
Kind of wear it as a badge of pride almost. It's
Yeah,
like,
and if
you
it's
know,
only one, that's great.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's enough. But you got to have the one and keep trying until you get that one.
All right. There's another one that on your list that I sort of chuckled at because I end up spending a great deal of my life working with
The Sun Also Rises.
Sun Also Rises. Tell me what's that one doing on there?
You know what they all have in common? The dragon tattoo girl, that was like list 2. What all of my 10 had in common was characters or central people who were on the outside of something,
Okay.
looking in. And
So
that
you like
otherness.
the expatriate, the alienation. and-
Yes.
okay.
They all have that theme running through them, which I didn't realize until I had compiled it.
Okay. So you like the outsiders, the people that are on the periphery.
Well, I don't think I'm alone in that. If you figure that Harry Potter is probably one of the most popular series of all, at least in the last 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
He's an orphan. How many of the books that have made it 50 or 100 or 200 years are about orphans or about people on the outside? So I think when we look at literature and why it matters, and there have been a lot of articles about that recently, why the
Right.
humanities, if you can't get a job with an English degree, why do we do it? And one of the things that makes the humanities, and particularly literature, important is because it helps you walk in someone else's shoes.
Sure.
And sometimes the shoes that you're walking in maybe turn out to be your own. And so most people, I think, go through life with at least one moment where they feel like they're on the outside looking in.
Okay.
And books can at the very least help you realize you aren't the only one with that sensation, but
Right.
maybe they help you navigate the way back in.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great thing. I think one of the values we always try to teach as we're reading is it's almost like a dual sort of initiative at the same time. On the one hand, you're trying to teach people how to articulate why they like what they like. But at the same time, we're trying to encourage them to grow a little bit past that and to not spend their whole life reading books in which they only see themselves,
Sure.
but which they can identify with.
But to challenge yourself.
Right,
See,
right.
that's so another example, like Water for Chocolate. The way it affected me was that it got me on a complete sort of exploration of Latina literature
Right.
and a different perspective. I didn't see myself at all.
Yeah.
And that was what was so wonderful.
Yeah.
You go somewhere exotic, and we did a show once on armchair traveling, I think, books that take you somewhere else. So they can affect your life in that they are totally not you or
Right.
not your familiar space and introduce you to some place that you never knew you even wanted to go.
Yeah. Becomes a great escape from yourself, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So. Well, great. Well, we are running out of time, so give us one more recommendation, and then we will call this an episode.
Okay, so this one affected my life because it probably could have gotten me thrown off a plane. The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid
Okay.
by Bill Bryson, who's one of my favorites. I was laughing so hard, and I was trying so hard not to laugh out loud that I looked like I was having a seizure. And I basically cried my way through this book on a plane and feel sorry for the person next to me. So sometimes they affect you just in the moment, but then when I know I need a laugh and a happy space, I just go back.
Okay.
a good
Great,
one.
great. Well, everybody make your lists, put them on Facebook, and
Yeah, argue with us. Reading for
exactly.
the Rest of Us is on Facebook, so give us your list. Tell us where we went wrong. Tell me
All-
why I should like Middlemarch.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great episode. Enjoyed this a lot. We'll see you next time.